Hello, everyone. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. I'm Eve Engler. Canadian Foreign Policy Hour is a critical look at Canada's role abroad. And this week, there's a number of developments, maybe a bit more positive, in fact, than some weeks. There was a big NATO convention here in Montreal. Very positive developments there that I'll get to in a bit. Before that, a few things. The Owen Schock has a piece on Canadian Dimension titled "Assassination Plot in Bolsonaro's Office Raises Questions. Why did Canada support him?" And Bolsonaro is his planning to hold on to power, and that came out in the legal uh, case against him, prosecution, I guess, and then talks a bit about Canada's kind of ties to Bolsonaro. There's a report in the Globe and Mail that the titled "Security Agencies Suspect Modi Knew of Targeted Killings," and they're claiming the Canadian intelligence is pretty sure a number of top officials in Modi's government were aware of this plan to kill Sikh activist in Vancouver, Nijar, and and that Modi probably was aware of this. That's the assumption. They don't know, but that's their assumption. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I tend to believe the official story on this issue. The Globe and Mail business section has big two-page spread. Saturday, maybe I forget what day it was, and the headline is "Struggling to Survive the Valley of Death." Raising capital in the country's junior mining sector has been getting progressively harder over the past decade. But Ottawa's recent limits on Chinese state-sponsored funds have made the job. I cut off the rest of the headline, but made the job even more difficult. And it's a big two-page spread, and it's mostly stuff that I'm just not interested in how junior Canadian mining companies raise capital and the changes over the recent years, and some of this is just cyclical and whatever. But the an element in the story is basically saying that the Canadian government bringing these restrictions on Canadian companies' ties to Chinese uh, mining firms, Chinese capital, have made this even more difficult, and basically complaining about these restrictions and talking again about the Canadian mining companies that are going to that have and are going to start registering elsewhere as part of their relationship to Chinese companies to get away from the restrictions the Canadian government's imposing. And this is a theme I've talked about many times because I think it's a fairly substantive theme in foreign policy. Of course, the mining sector is this very nefarious, important part of Canadian foreign policy and what diplomacy does around the world, particularly in some of the most impoverished countries. But you see this battle playing out between what the interests of Canadian capital is on mining, which is to have relations and sell and ties to companies no matter where they are, not and then the perspective of the U.S. empire and Canada's geopolitical outlook, which is to try to constrain China and hype up the fear of China having influence or control over rare and different strategic minerals, and to push back against that. So the Globe Mail is the business section is really keeping this theme alive. And it's really important. I mean, the Globe Mail is incredibly anti-China in its front section, right? And yet in the report on business, it opens up space for this fairly kind of honest let's call it assessment of the kind of naked capitalist desires or needs um, to work with China or any other entity, no matter what the sort of political ramifications or the may be. That's the logic of the corporation, but then the state steps in to restrict that, not for, in my opinion, human rights or benevolent purposes, but because that's the desire of Washington and the Anglosphere target China kind of policy. On that front, there's more and more stories and more provincial officials, Canadian government officials leaving us, Trudeau government leaving a degree of openness on this about basically trying to, as part of their fear of Donald Trump's tariffs and sort of nationalistic economic target China kind of policies to 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 sort of renegotiate the Canada Mexico U.S. trade agreement and cut out China, cut out Mexico, because the claim is that China has too much kind of influence in Mexico, though my understanding is it's very much hyped up the actual importance of Chinese capital in Mexico. But that's how they're framing it, that we should be willing to just negotiate one on one. Trump dislikes Mexico, and let's get to just one on one. When the previous kind of dynamic was that we have more power over Trump, over the U.S., if Canada and Mexico sort of stick together and have a bit of a united front in the face of Trump's pressure. But that seems to be increasingly being taken up to kind of sideline Mexico on this question, and it speaks to just how kind of panicked the so much of the kind of business class and the elite are on this issue. There was, surprisingly, in rarity, the Report on Business did have a piece that a column saying our country should get closer to the non-Western BRICS economic alliance. You don't see much of that, honestly. You don't see much of that, and uh, so there is some people in the business elite that obviously understand that this total orientation towards the U.S. is has all kinds of uh, deleterious impacts, and there's talk about the BRICS, better ties to BRICS countries. But I think that realistically, that's a very marginal opinion among business and other elite sectors. This week, 4 or 5 days ago, Nikki Ashton, one of the more left-wing NDP MPs, posted. She's been posting, pretty good stuff on Palestine. And she said, one of her posts said, Canada used to stand up for human rights and international law, but we don't when it comes to Palestine and Lebanon. And it's just one more time. I think a few weeks ago, I talked about Nikki Ashton doing something similar. This mythologizing of Canadian foreign policy history. And I responded by saying something to the effect of, was that when we sent troops to Sudan in 1884, or was that the troops to South Africa in late 1890s, early 1900s? Was that when Canada, invaded Korea? Was that Lester Pearson in his role in the Nakba? Was that Trudeau Senior supporting the coup against Pinochet, or supporting Suharto's invasion of East Timor? Or maybe that was Brian Mulroney's invasion of Iraq and support for the U.S. invasion of Panama. But the point being here is that this just doesn't exist. This record doesn't exist. We can have a debate about was there a time when Pierre Trudeau was a bit more independent minded than Justin Trudeau? We could have a discussion about, was Jean Chrétien less anti-Palestinian than Paul Martin and up until today. There's some discussions to be had about these issues, but that's really around the edges. And yet, somebody is at the best end of the official politics will continue to myth make, and it's a problem. Honestly, it's a problem because we won't develop the critical consciousness and the um, I guess if you want to call it radical rejection of official Canadian politics until we root it in its genuine history, which of course has all kinds of structural elements. It's not just about is it Stephen Harper, is it Justin Trudeau, is it Jagmeet Singh sitting in that position, but rather based upon different structural questions of Canadian political and economic life. The Business Council of Canada in today's Globe, page 3, big story, business headline: Business lobby urges 3% defense spending. So the Business Council of Canada is already coming out with this report saying 2% is not enough of GDP. The NATO target, 2% is not enough. We got to be hitting the 3% target, which of course we all knew. This was right when the path towards 2% became increasingly solidified. We knew that they would then say, oh, we has to go above that because the militarists are always asking for more. um, and so it's remarkable when you look at the lack of affordable housing, the increased uh, number of people without homes and on the streets and stuff like that. It's remarkable when you look at the real security threats of climate disturbances. But this is where the Business Council and it's important. Like the Business Council has always been this way. I go over a bit in my stand on guard for whom, but the business councils have been pushing increased military spending for a few decades and decades. And part of it is that they represent the arms companies. So that's, I don't know what the proportion is but a couple percent. It depends on how you define the arms industry, the whole aviation sector. If you define it very broadly, then I don't know, maybe it's 5% of the business council, 10% of the business council's members. But there's broader questions. They frame it, of course, as centrally important to our trade relationship with the U.S. But I'd say that you got to go even deeper than that, and you look at how the military brings in corporate, CEOs into the honorary general positions, and so this goes back, more than a century with the militia, and actually even further in British history of wealthy people basically being in charge of platoons or regiments, and so there's that dynamic, and then I think there's also obviously the military is kind of part of the established order, but I think even if you go even further in that, there's like a class structure and an authoritarian element of military culture that's the corporate elite appreciate and are would like to see more of in society. And so you bring all these things together, and that's kind of why the military is so supported by the political agents of the corporate class, which of course the Canadian Business Council is a preeminent element in that, and hence their promotion of even more military spending. This week, Dimitri Lascaris reported on a poll and this is his summary. None of the top 7 choices is military spending. And yet Canada's political elite and corporate media are obsessed with vast increases in Canada's military budget. Those who say they would pay higher taxes to adequately address, so none of the top 7 preferred things, education, environment, in terms of what people said they would pay more taxes for, the military doesn't reach into the top 7. So while the Globe and Mail and most of the media is telling us that the public wants to hit the NATO target, that wants to increase military spending. They're concerned about the military, all this kind of business, which, depending on how you poll things, you can, of course, get people to say. But when it comes to the sort of fundamental question of what do you prioritize, if you're asking me what I need to pay more taxes for, uh, you don't even the military doesn't hit the top seven, and this fits with a longer pattern. I've stated this many times before. The polling basically shows historically that the public has fairly positive sentiment towards the military if you ask them, but then whenever you ask them to prioritize, military is always at the bottom of the list, right? What are their political priorities? The military consistently is way down the line, and so this poll kind of fits that that longer term pattern, despite the media telling us not just that we should increase military spending, but that the public is demanding that is increasing the mantra in the dominant media. The public is demanding we increase Canadian military spending. Now, in response to the insanity of spending $82 billion on the military to hit the NATO 2% target, which is what we would need to do by 2032, doubling where we're already at, which is already a doubling of since the last decade or so, 41 billion. There was a real response to that this weekend. Honestly, the first major response that I have seen in I don't know how many years now, maybe since Afghanistan mobilization. Um, but there was obviously this NATO Parliamentary Assembly taking place in Montreal. I think it concluded today. It There was a number of actions on Friday. There was a day of workshops at Université Québec à Montréal, which is the traditional kind of left-wing francophone, working class francophone university that's really been an engine of student strikes in the past. And the Chèque à la Guerre demo, I went to at 3 o'clock on the Friday, was small, it was 40 people, it was organized very last minute. Honestly, there's an interesting backstory there that doesn't speak kindly to Chèque à la Guerre, but I'll leave that aside. In the evening, the Convergence de lutte anticapitaliste and Désinvestir pour la Palestine, Disinvest for Palestine, organized a night demo. And there was the student strike on Palestine on Thursday and Friday. I'll get to that at the end. Very exciting as well. Very successful. That kind of got tied into the NATO mobilization. And so I didn't go to UQAM on the Friday, but what I'm told is that on the Thursday and Friday, it was very lively, well organized workshops, lots of people. There were NATO, Palestine kind of workshops, kind of stuff. I saw some of the postering, I saw some of the stuff around about it. And so they then did a demo from 4:30 to the Place des Arts, close to where the Palais des Congrès, where the NATO was meeting. And my neighborhood for the last 3 weeks or so has been covered with posters saying "Bloquons l'OTAN," block NATO, some stickers, and they produced a paper. The CLAC produced a paper about I saw about 3 weeks ago for the first time, and I showed up late about 6 o'clock with my 2-year-old Zuri. You knew it was going to be a lively affair, right? It was a nighttime demo. CLAC's known for militant protests. You had the summit in town. You had the student strike. A lot of things were kind of lending. You were expecting it was going to be raucous protest. I wasn't expecting how big it was. I thought if there was a couple hundred people, I would consider that a success. There was at least 1,000. I thought about 1,500, and we marched. Didn't march very far because the Palais is not very far from Place des Arts, and about 2 blocks into the march, I saw a thing I hadn't seen. I don't think I've seen since 2015, which is the riot squad, the full riot squad. And earlier in the day, I was by the Palais as I was biking away from the Ashak demo. I saw just tons of cops. And I biked around and I saw the riot squad, about 30 of these riot squad guys with the full on, the matraque and the shield. And and so 2 or 3 blocks into the demo, the riot squad that were walking alongside the protest, which is something that Montreal police riot squad do sort of occasionally with certain types of demos, and they scared the riot squad. I didn't exactly see what happened, but they basically were able to push the riot squad back, and the riot squad like kind of like went back into the alleyway. I think people threw like pink paint on the cops because there's some images of these like riot squad guys like covered in pink paint. There were fireworks and stuff. I didn't catch the full of what happened, but I did see something I haven't seen, like I said, since 2015 and 2012, the two student strikes, where the riot squad really looked like they were scared and were pushed back. Usually, it's of course the other way around. And and so that was we you sort of knew where things were going at that point. And because I had a 2-year-old with me, I then tried to get a little bit ahead of things and a little bit away from the main crowd. And then a couple of blocks later, 5 or 6 windows were smashed at the Palais. In the underground is kind of this uh, covered area under kind of like not a highway but a major road, and where you kind of echo, so it's really loud. It's kind of it feels good to be there and yelling, and people are busting some windows, and there's a certain kind of feel to that. I wasn't there because again I had a 2-year-old, so I was a block or plus away, kind of observing, watching things, and the two cars burnt, which now they're just reporting that in fact it was the tear gas from the police that burnt one of these cars. We know, and now there's images of it. And Alex Terrell from the Green Party, leader of Quebec, he told me about this story in 2015, which I'd forgotten. I probably read about at the time, but he saw a car get burnt, and in fact, a whole family get really hurt by the tear gas, including kids, because a tear gas canister ended up in their car, and the car burned, and it was like I guess pretty terrible. And then the insurance wouldn't pay anyway. The whole story. But basically, now that then led to the police dispersing the protest. I heard a few people were hurt by the police. A couple of people were arrested. In the scope of like Montreal clack demos, it was like 5 or 6 windows. I went down to the Palais the next day, and there was 5 windows I saw boarded up. Some people brought hammers, so some people are pretty sure they planned to do this. I don't know, of course, but I have usually been against busting windows at protests. I'm against, ambivalent sometimes. It's situational. In this case, I think it was unequivocally a positive thing. Unequivocally, it led from a NATO standpoint. We can talk the Palestine question in a second, but from a NATO perspective, this then boom, like all over the press. Headlines in Radio Canada is something to the effect of uh, demonstration calling for Canada to withdraw from NATO degenerates. La Presse, not quite as good a headline. All over. Now, the Zionists go completely bananas. They try to make this all about, the Palestinian Hamas people, and they go bananas. Like the global Zionist movement on Twitter goes just totally wild. People have probably seen the fact that Trudeau was at Taylor Swift concert, um, kind of simultaneously, and they contrast, as they frame it, Montreal burning down and Trudeau dancing in Toronto at Taylor Swift. As they say, par rapport, really nothing to do with each other. But even Poliev picks up on this ridiculous angle. Anyways, so then the next day there's a demo plan. The Mouvement Québécois has its demo, and 150 people, bunch of media, tons of media, great headlines in the global news. New York Post headline is another demonstration calling for Canada to withdraw from NATO. New York Post has a really like this prominent photo of one of the banners at the demo of no to NATO, no to war, Canada out of NATO, I think was the slogan on the banner. Today's Globe and Mail, a photo of former head of the Peace Congress with a no, Canada out of NATO placard. pretty prominent picture. So the Canada out of NATO, which is completely off the political radar, got back on the political radar in the last 72 hours. And of course, there's lots of negative attention. This comes in the context of the negativity that is associated with busting some windows and car burning and stuff like that. But the it's from the anti-NATO standpoint, it is fully put on the agenda. The NATO counter summit on Sunday. The three different corporate media outlets come. The Téléjournal, the Radio Canada's Téléjournal, which is like their big nighttime news program. They do a 2 minute clip that's a real like pretty fair-minded kind of like here's the pro-NATO, here's the anti-NATO perspective. They show image from the counter summit, interview one of the spokespeople, and this was just sort of replicated all over. It goes global, right? Al Jazeera, Associated Press, Reuters, all talking about this summit in other languages. If you search in Spanish and I think Turkish and stuff like that when in Twitter when I was doing some searches. So it's I think this mobilization against NATO was really successful in terms of putting anti-NATO onto the agenda. And it's a kind of a fascinating issue because NATO is a weird one where like it's actually, it's really horrible what it's about, promoting more military spending, promoting, wars. But then it's actually covered quite a bit. Like NATO is in the paper a lot, right? Mostly recently about increased military spending. That's been one, and the other one being, supporting Ukraine. So NATO's in the media a lot, and yet there's basically no critical discussion, at least over the past since Russia's invasion. Basically, no voice that's saying anything sort of critical of NATO. So to have a kind of like outpouring of that over this three-day weekend, I think is a big boost to anti-war, anti-NATO mobilization. Again, I repeat, I don't, I've traditionally been pretty ambivalent, sometimes hostile to some of the window breaking, not for some like, massive principle that breaking property is, immoral or whatever, but that it's not tactically intelligent. It's not serving the aims of moving, the movement forward. In this case, I come to a very different conclusion where those individuals who took that on, they deserve to be, I think, quite unequivocally applauded, at least from the NATO side. We can talk the Palestine side maybe in a little bit. The other part, I think, in terms of why the demo is as big as it was because of the student strike, in part. And this is the other part. It's a sign that this popular revolt against the genocide in Gaza, that it's broadening its analysis. That's another really exciting part of this. I don't know how far this goes, but this is, I think, the clearest indication by far of that happening, right? And if you look at how the student groups organized the strike, they very consciously promoted the NATO. I think it just so happened that the NATO summit and the student strike just coincided date-wise, and that's why this is played out. But nonetheless, it has played out at some level. How far this goes, we don't know. Time will tell. But I think we should definitely take some excitement from that. And one of the parts, in terms of the NATO, okay, so first of all, the Israeli delegation at this summit. So obviously, there's really good reasons to be hostile about that. There's NATO. There's other parts of this. Of course, I think a lot of people are also following the escalation in Ukraine, and Biden okaying the attack comes deep into Russia, and so NATO forces, basically bombing deep in Russia, or directly assisting Ukraine in bombing deep in Russia. And then Russia's response with the hypersonic missile that they launched, and the response by changing their nuclear doctrine. So and then they apparently the Russian media talked about how long it would take for these missiles to hit the different cities across Europe. So it's clear that Russia's clearly responding to the U.S. escalation by escalating, and its rhetoric. So this is very dangerous stuff. And so I think some of the reason for the size of the demonstration Friday night was that precisely that, and NATO's role in all of that. Um, and so that's going on. I should also say that there was two. The Ottawa Citizen columnist there, Andrew Cohen, he has a piece in the Montreal Gazette, kind of be like, "Oh, before you smash windows against NATO, you should know really what the NATO is about. It's just about defense." Blah, blah, blah. Totally dumb. And then Journal de Montréal also had a similar type piece from this academic who's at the NATO session. It's like, but this is where you really see the mobilization and, quite frankly, again, the busting of the windows, how this plays it out. So the CLAC, the Convergence de lutte anticapitaliste, that is the main organizer of the demo, they have a series of reasons to be against NATO and talk about increased military spending and wars of aggression and whatever. And totally correct. They're spot on. There's nothing incorrect about their analysis. But then they have this pro NATO academic in the Journal de Montréal. Oh, these anarchists, before they bust windows, they should learn about NATO. Da, 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 and this is so wrong, and it just kind of this mocking of the thing. But again, this is not, they're literally, Journal de Montréal is literally taking from CLAC's website and publishing it, and then saying, no, that's not the case. But you've won 30% of the battle when the Journal de Montréal is publishing what's on your website. You've already gotten a big chunk of the way there, of course. They're no longer ignoring you, which they all the Mouvement Québécois pour la Paix demos I've been to, and different anti-NATO demos, they just getting completely ignored. And yet, on Saturday, the day after the windows get busted, there's numerous cameras there, Associated Press and global media pick it up. So that's obvious. That now I'll just touch quickly on the Israel side to this all. They lost it. They really lost it. I mean, people talking about this being crystal knock, and and Melissa Lantsman in the House of Commons today, still today, days after, is talking about how Montreal was burning down, and it just bananas. It got so out of control that, so they're claiming this is all this big anti-Semitic incident. So this was the convention center holding the NATO summit. Palestine, they did burn an effigy of Netanyahu earlier in the Pas Bazazal. Palestine was a big part of the reason why it was successful in mobilization. But Palestine was, it was a NATO summit, and it was like bloquons l'OTAN. That was the message on the front banner, on the posters, on and on and on. And so, but there's this, network on Twitter and stuff. It's great, Israeli state, of course, network of just they want to hype everything up, and then try to frame it's like all the Muslims. It's the Muslims have taken over Canada, and the Muslims are busting the windows. Now, I mean, I can bet you pretty strong that the people who busted the windows were Franco anarchists from East End of Montreal. I don't know that, but that would be pretty strong guess here. Um, and one guy, he posts this book that he wrote, Montreal Riots. If someone had written a book in 2017 warning about the future problems in Canada, as a book about Muslims taking over Canada. So the Convergence de lutte anticapitaliste comes out of the FTA protests in 2001, right? It's anti-capitalist convergence. And it's not I mean, the idea that it's a Muslim Arab, or it's just so ridiculous, right? Anyone who knows that. And so you had a situation where the Montreal police, who had just been the day after, they were in pretty big battle with CLAC and the protesters, they're effectively defending the protesters, saying we didn't see any anti-Semitism. There's been no allegation, there's no report about anti-Semitism. So the police are essentially the next day are essentially pushing back against this like global claim, which then gets picked up by Trudeau and Melanie Joly and Bill Blair, and they're all claiming that there was this like anti-Semitic night of anti-Semitism in Montreal where there was like the NATO assembly. So it's just the word anti-Semitism really has become meaningless. That's just they've just gone so far on this. It's just kind of remarkable to see. Now, there is an interesting question, I think, a legitimate discussion about does, the busting of windows at a protest, even if it's not really a Palestine protest, does it, and but it has a heavy Palestine element to it, does that have a negative pushback in terms of justifying state repression, in terms of further marginalizing? There's some interesting discussion to be had there. And in that one, I would say it's much more up in the air of whether this was a good thing or not. On the NATO question, I think it's pretty unequivocal. Moving on, Cotler on Monday, Cotler got unanimous House of Commons that his resolution for his contribution to the defense of human rights. So that's Irwin Cotler, who is the leading proponent of Israel in Canada, a staunch proponent of moving the Canadian embassy to Jerusalem, whole history of hardline pro-Israel activism. I'm not going to get into it all. I've gone into it before. Alexandre Boulris was quoted in the CBC The National that night saying that Cotler was remarkable. Now, Matthew Green on my Twitter, when someone pushed Matthew Green, the left-wing NDP MP, the pro-Palestinian MP, about the NDP's position, he responded to my questioning him on why the NDP voted for this resolution by saying that there was probably only 5 NDP MPs in the House, and kind of sort of saying it's sort of a procedural vote where like if no one objects, it just sort of passes unanimously, and so essentially trying to say it didn't mean anything. You can debate that, but Alexandre Boulris on a CBC National calling Cotler a remarkable individual, that does mean something. Amidst a Holocaust in Gaza, calling a leading advocate of the apartheid state a remarkable individual. Sorry, Matthew. Sorry, Alexandre. That means something, and it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable that people who call themselves pro-Palestinian would continue to do the promotion of Irwin Cotler. Elizabeth May is a huge Irwin Cotlerite. Totally odious stuff. Nima Mashouf, the NDP candidate here in my writing of Iranian background, she jumped in on this whole Irwin Cotler thing in a story in La Presse, where she basically said, like, if they're targeting Irwin Cotler, who's not an Iranian, not like Iranian background, then the targeting of Iranians, and she put herself in the middle of it, that they're targeting her for her opposition to the Iranian government. So she went pretty far, even though she was on the boat to Gaza, right? She was just on the boat to Gaza, which did it sail, or I don't think it ended up sailing, but she she's like playing this game of this Iran demonization via this Cotler business, and Nima Mashouf has worked with Cotler and on anti-Iran stuff, and that's really a pretty dubious kind of affair of some of these self-described pro-Palestinian Iranian Canadians kind of joining an alliance with someone like Cotler, who's clearly coming at the Iran issue from a Zionist perspective. On the note of Iran and this stuff, how much demonization Iran there is out there. That Goldie Gamari, the MPP in Ontario, she tweeted, "My family left Iran because your people ruined my country. God bless Savak. Their only mistake was showing too much mercy to Islamo-fascist terrorists." Savak, of course, was the Shah's brutal intelligence that was responsible for many thousands of deaths in the 60s and 70s. And so, but here you have like just the open promotion of that. And Gamari's gone down some crazy territory. I responded to her about Savak's violence, and she really went at me as a middle-aged white man. It was pretty funny. But uh, so this is the kind of stuff that there's no pushback. There's no official pushback from an MPP like lauding the brutal Shah's violent security forces. That's the extent of the kind of like anti-Iran ethos in Canadian political life. Quickly through a few things on Palestine. Haaretz talks about Canada approving 5,000 temporary visas for Israelis. Yet they, of course, almost no one has been able to get here from Gaza. I wrote about this a month ago in a piece that I was quite happy with myself about called "War Criminal Israelis Are Welcome to Canada, Palestinians Barred." And I basically made the point that the victims of the Holocaust are denied access to Canada, and the perpetrators of the Holocaust are allowed in. And we know, of course, there is a historical analogy to this, which is the during the Nazi Holocaust, where there was a none is too many, basically not entirely, but close to blocking Jewish immigrants. And then, of course, after World War II, there was a bringing in of all kinds of former SS and other Nazi types. And and you can make it's not an exact parallel, of course, but there is something there, which I elaborated a month ago. And this Haaretz thing is sort of generated a bunch more discussion in that kind of domain. This week, of course, the International Criminal Court put out a warrant for Netanyahu and Gallant. Trudeau's position was considering how much Trudeau's enabled this Holocaust was okay, where he sort of defended international law. He wasn't clear that we would arrest Netanyahu if he came, but he sort of implied that, and so that's good. Housefather, his special advisor on anti-Semitism, Housefather came out explicitly, Liberal MP came out explicitly saying that Trudeau needs to defy the ICC and ignore its obligations under the Rome Statute to protect Netanyahu and Gallant. Lindsey Graham, actually, after meeting Melanie Joly, I think on Friday, Lindsey Graham, the U.S. Republican senator, I don't know if he still has what his position is, but he basically said that if Canada was to fulfill its obligations of the Rome Statute, that the U.S. should destroy its economy. That was basically word for word what he said. And same thing with Britain or France or any of the allies. So it'd be interesting to see, kind of how that. I haven't seen any pushback to that, to his position, but and I know that the G7 today is discussing this matter, about their common position on the ICC arrest warrants. Quickly run through a few things. NDP got targeted in the House of Commons, Heather McPherson, for wearing a watermelon pin, even though that's the pro-Palestinian symbol, even though you see the hostage symbol on Melissa Lantsman and others. What are some developments? The B'nai B'rith had an event a couple days ago with the head of the Canadian Police Association, Commissioner Tom Carrick from the Ontario Provincial Police. So that whole relationship between Zionist organization and the police and the sort of pushing for more repression. In Ottawa, there was over the weekend, the police apparently again arrested. They did this last week for the first time over the past 13 months or so. They started arresting people, and then did that again this weekend. And apparently, so they arrested someone on Saturday, and then there was a rally on the Sunday, kind of like a jail support, and I think they arrested somebody there as well. So they seem to be ramping up the repression. Now, on the other side to all this, there was a mobilization at the entrance of Collins Aerospace in Oakville, which produces stuff for the F-35, F-16. So there's another sort of direct action. I don't know how impactful it was on its operations, but it was early morning kind of targeted direct action. You had another good development with the mayor of Mississauga, Carolyn Parrish, where she met with a number of pro-Palestinian activists and tweeted out an FU to the Israel lobby that's been going at her. At McGill, there was indigenous women planted a tree in solidarity with Palestine, and basically this is unceded territory, and we stand with Palestinians and McGill administration. You and all your repression can you can screw yourself was essentially the message. And then there's this massive student strike. So 40 plus student associations representing more than or around 85,000 students across the province went on strike for 2 days. Dawson College, the biggest cégep, biggest college in Quebec, was shut down all of Thursday, completely shut down after the student vote. And I heard differing reports, but some of the other CEGEPs were also shut down. I don't know. I didn't see news articles about that, but I heard that from people. Um, there was, like I said, at UCAM, my understanding is that UCAM, the strike was quite real. So the associations that voted to strike, that most of the classes were picketed and therefore didn't go forward. And I heard, like I said, there was lots of workshops and quite dynamic from at the campus on the Friday and the Thursday. What I heard, I was at Concordia on Thursday where there was a convergence, principally from Dawson and McGill, and then Concordia students, and it was a serious demo. It was at least 1,000 people inside. It was quite, I of course went to Concordia 20 some odd years ago, and inside the hall building there was hundreds and hundreds of people chanting and protesting, and it was great because this was right when Netanyahu was blocked back in 2002 when I was in the student union. It was the same spot that where the big theater in the hall building, and so it was of course the day that the ICC put the arrest warrant out for Netanyahu, and that was one of the things that was done in that mobilization. There was a people's arrest warrant put out that the activists around the student union put out, calling for Netanyahu to be arrested as part of the protest, and the fact that the ICC put out a formal arrest the same day, and then this mobilization in the hall building, and it was a little bit of a trip down memory lane for me. And so yeah, it was a real student strike. There was Sherbrooke, I heard Trois-Rivières, some of the student associations, multiple CEGEPs in different parts of Montreal. Many, I don't think any, I don't know if there was any actual on strike at McGill, because I think the student structure works differently with the association is under SMU. But at Concordia, there were the departmental level, so like I don't know which ones, but probably anthropology, sociology, history, went on strike, and the classes were in large part or entirely or mostly, I don't know exactly, but were canceled, and so everyone knew about it. Certainly, anyone who was in the hall building knew about it. So this was I think, probably the biggest international focused student strike in Quebec history. So Quebec, of course, has an important history of student strikes. I don't know this to be true, but I don't, certainly in the past 25 years, there were student strike. We did have student strike around the FTA back in 2002. I can't remember exactly how big it was. We had a very big demonstration that day. We got up to almost 10,000 people. So maybe it was as many or more, but that was a little bit less internationalist. I mean, in one sense, it was very internationalist, but it was partly about the impact of the FTA on, privatizing education and neoliberalism, pushing up tuition and stuff like that, done in the context of, global solidarity. But this mobilization was calling on their institutions to cut all ties with Israel, and student strike in solidarity with Palestine. Um, so it was quite a remarkable affair, and is important display of international solidarity. And I'll leave it at that. And if people have comments and questions, I have about 10 minutes. I'm not sure if Laura is here, but I will search. I don't see any. I don't see any hands up, and I don't see Laura here. Okay, I see Catherine has her hand raised, so I think I've unmuted you, Catherine. Go ahead.
Hi, yeah, thanks so much for the first-hand account of what happened in Montreal with the windows and the protests and everything. But we've been seeing on TV the image of a woman who they have named walking around with a keffiyeh on and her hand raised in a Nazi salute, talking about the final solution. Did you see this person? Do you know if this actually,
Well, it's funny.
what
I actually,
anything about this?
yeah. Well, today, I mean, I saw, of course, the report about it, and I recognized the woman. When I was at Concordia on Thursday, when the Dawson students, two different. I don't know how this happened, but two different demos came from the West, from where Dawson College is. And I don't know if they were kind of split up by a block or two. Anyways, but so two come towards Concordia. There's like a rally in front of Concordia, a few hundred people, and then two demos of, I don't know, each first one was 150, 200, and another one's 100 or something like that. And I saw this woman because she's much older, look like these Dawson kids now, they look like real kids to me. They're like, 19, 20-year-olds, right? Maybe even younger, I guess, because grade 12s. And and so I saw this woman, but anyways, I was looking at my phone today because I was imaging. There was a rally on this, there's this pro-Israel rally on the side, which starts off, I saw the whole kind of process developing where just one person shows up with Israeli flag and then a couple more, then the riot squad come in and then there's like 20 riot squad kind of protecting them. And so she comes by. I actually have it in my video that I was looking back at today. This woman yells at her that's in this pro-Israel rally. And then she seems to respond, but then she puts up her arm in this Hail Hitler kind of way. And now I had seen this woman walk by before because like I said, she stood out. All these other people at the protest were like 18, 19, 20, and I don't know, she looked like she was 35, 40. And I don't know anything about her. I don't know anything about her. I don't know, I don't the Hail Hitler element, like to basically call these people rallying in support of Israel's Holocaust in Gaza to basically call them Nazis. I don't have a problem with that. The final solution business, I think that's very unequivocally. I don't think you go up to people who you think are Jewish and say, "Do you know what the final solution?" I mean, I think that is clearly anti-Semitic, out of place in the scope of things. I don't think it's at all important, but it's not, definitely deserves to be condemned. But I don't know more about her. I don't know, I've never seen this woman before. A weird story about like she apparently is a franchisee of a second cup in the Jewish General Hospital, and someone said on it is like a kosher shop. I don't know at all like what, maybe there's more to the story, maybe there isn't. In the scheme of things, it's totally irrelevant. There was more than 1,000 people there. One guy had a Russian flag, and I went up and I tried to engage him and why I didn't think that was a good idea. And so there's, I mean, people show up or whatever they want to show up with at a demo. in no way did she speak for the demo. Not that the demo was like controlled, like it's all pretty kind of loose in terms of its organizing structure. But yeah, so it was remarkable. Like the CBC, the national, the CBC Nationals coverage of this on I guess last night, the Sunday coverage, because the CBC National shows up to the counter summit on Sunday, and but they don't end up playing anything from the counter summit in their 2 minute clip, but they talk about this woman at this demo on Thursday. So it's like they have a clip about NATO, and they're talking about like some individual at the demo on Thursday. That's nothing. No one pretense it was about a NATO. It was all about the Palestine. It was about the student strike on Palestine, and then they connected into the NATO thing. And it's just like, what? You ignore the counter summit that you sent a reporter to get to interview a couple of people and to get some shots of, but then you include this anyway. So it just tells you how I mean it's just part of the media bias. This is somehow this breaking of windows at a NATO convention is an anti-Semitic affair, even though the police don't say they saw any anti-Semitism. They didn't receive any complaints about anti-Semitism. The police hate the protesters. They hate Clack. They've long hated Clack. They would love to, demonize Clack, but they're sort of caught into this whole cycle. Anyways, Sally, go ahead.
Hey, Eve, I'm wondering if you know anything about the USS Liberty and if you're aware of the four-part documentary on it, the ship that was almost sunk by the Israelis in 67, and then it was suppressed, U.S. intelligence ship, and it was suppressed for all these years. They've now, they're trying to get a lawsuit going. They've got this amazing four-part doc that's on YouTube. We were always wondering, like, does Israel have anything on the US? Like, why is there this blind support? And this four-part doc really brings up the connection with LBJ and McNamara and, try to perhaps send a false flag and suggest that Egypt sank this ship so that they would have an excuse to bring American arms in there. I'm just wondering if you are aware of it and if you comment on it.
Yeah, not really. I mean, the at a surface level, I'm aware of the history, but you almost certainly know it better than I. I haven't seen this series, and I think there's no doubt, in a sense, the U.S., the Israeli intelligence stuff have stuff on American officials. That is clearly one element of the story. I don't think that's an important element to why the U.S. is so pro-Israel. I think there's all kinds of factors, from crazy Christian Zionism to the power of pro-Israel Jewish organizations, to the U.S. empire wanting to keep the region divided, the Arab region divided. So just to the military-industrial complex, liking, selling, and giving and delivering weapons. So there's all these different to anti-Muslim sentiment. I mean, it goes on and on in terms of the full explanation of it all. But yeah, there's no doubt that the U.S. is pretty extreme in its pro-Israel. And when Lindsey Graham was talking about would the Americans, if Canada actually really moved to arrest Netanyahu, would the Americans you know bring in all kinds of tariffs and try to as Graham said, destroy Canada's economy? I mean, would they go that far? How far would they go, right? Or do that to Britain or France? Which would obviously not be in U.S. Interests, but just saying it obviously has a political impact and speaks to the scope to which the U.S. is willing to put its power behind enabling, Israeli crimes and violence, etc. Nadia, go ahead. Oh,
Yes, thank you, Eve. You know, the summit we were at yesterday, the anti-NATO summit we were at yesterday, was there any coverage of that in the media? And I'm wondering, they were supposed to meet the next day at 10 o'clock at the real summit, NATO summit. And what became of that, I don't know.
yeah. Well, so like I said, Téléjournal, Radio-Canada's Téléjournal, did show clips from the counter summit. They interviewed somebody as well. So yes, there was coverage on Radio-Canada. CBC's clip on the National didn't have any in it. I don't know. I know Le Devoir sent somebody, and I think there was another camera. I don't know what media outlet was sent. I haven't seen anything from those other two, but Téléjournal definitely did cover it. And today at the press conference that we did at 10 a.m., La Presse showed up and Global and China, the CCTV, the Chinese state English language media showed up. I don't know if there's been, anything that's appeared that we ended up in a big debate with the La Presse reporter, kind of like, what about Putin? Kind of, he was really pushed questions. We were down around the convention, myself, Dimitri Lascaris, Tamara Lawrence. We were down around the convention. I got down there about 8:30, and we were sort of asking these NATO delegates coming in that do Palestinian lives are Palestinian lives worth the same as Ukrainian lives to them, and none of them wanted to respond. But the cops then sort of got kind of pushed us away, even though we were just actually on the street. But yeah, so there was some media. The media was down there. I think that I don't. We'll see if La Presse does something. I can tell what I can say for certain. There would have been no media at the counter summit, and there certainly would have been no media that showed up at this 10 a.m. last minute press conference that we did, on the street, if it wasn't for the clack demonstration on the Friday night. Go ahead, Lynn.
The USS Liberty says it all. LBJ assassinated JFK. It's completely it's a whole huge thing. It's not some light thing, Eves. It's not. And it, you really ought to see it like from the beginning to the end or read the books about it, find out about it because it lays it all out. It's clear. The Gulf of Tonkin, Vietnam, everything is laid out. Um, and I wondered what you said about the Russian flag. I didn't understand that. Why didn't you want someone to have a Russian flag? I'm thinking of trying to get one.
Well, I wouldn't. I would not. I personally wouldn't like promote a Russian flag. I don't. I think that I don't. Like I said, I've criticized Russia's invasion of Ukraine many times. There's not many countries that I would fly a flag of. Um, but that wouldn't even be my main argument to the individual who brought a Russian flag to a Palestine demonstration in front of Concordia University was simply Palestine PR. Does it serve the Palestinian struggle to have a Russian flag at that rally? And I think that the answer to that, I can't see any scenario which the answer to that is yes. I just, Russia's totally widely demonized within Canadian political culture, and to, link the Palestine issue, which is already the system tries to marginalize, to Russia, I don't see any possible argument for that being a positive for the Palestine movement. So that was my main argument, was just a simple tactical public relations argument. And again, that goes to back to my position on most of the window busting and stuff like that, is that, as this isn't like there aren't moral arguments necessarily against breaking windows. It's more a question of like what's the benefit and what's the gain and what's the loss, and part of that's PR. There's other elements, not just PR, but other elements to it. And I think it's imperative that people look at um, their political, that is central to how they engage in political affairs. Like, what slogans are chanted, right? There's lots of slogans chanted at Palestine demonstrations that I think are, mistaken. Like they're, going a little bit off tangent here, but like there's the Sunday demo put on by Montreal for Palestine. There's a Saturday demo put on by the Palestinian Youth Movement, but the Sunday demo, they've really gone like harder and harder in terms of the support the resistance. And I don't like I do support I think that Palestinians have every right to kill Israeli soldiers. And I think that I applaud like when I hear story, Haaretz reports that an Israeli soldier was killed in Gaza or in Lebanon. I think that's a good thing. I don't know how you couldn't view it from that lens at this point. Like, what else is going to stop Israel from its horrors, right? The only thing that's going to stop this beast is, I would love it if it was just the international solidarity, but realistically, the only thing to stop this beast is armed resistance. But that doesn't I don't translate that into it being useful in Montreal to spend immense amount of time talking about resistance. Like we're in a situation where Samidoun, a nobody claims it's even engaged in any violence, is being listed as a terrorist organization. Why wouldn't there be slogans being chanted about, either abolish Canada's terrorist list or Palestinian resistance is not terror. I don't like. Well, there's but that put the focus on the Canadian government criminalizing organizations that are just being. All they're claiming is that they have an association with the Palestinian organization involved in armed resistance. And so like these are tactical questions that we have to be like really serious about. If we're going to be serious about, our politics, we have to think through, how does something we do, how does it get played by the forces that don't like us? But how does it get played by the forces that are kind of ambivalent, that aren't necessarily hostile? How does it play by our supporters? This is an argument. Like if you were to start organizing based upon what Zionist groups thought of us, then we would just not do anything, of course, right? Because they demonize everything we do. So this is not an argument for that, but we have to be thinking about all these things. And I think that the centrally important part in all this is we have to center Canada. We have to center making life difficult for our politicians, our institutional structures, holding them to account. And so like, denouncing Canada's terrorist list, that's way more of putting Samidoun on our terrorist list, or saying, why is 14% of Canada's terrorist list devoted to a people who've been long subjugated by a apartheid colonial regime? That does way more to put our politicians' feet to the fire than sort of like vague, like support the resistance in Gaza, support the resistance in Lebanon. I mean, that's opening up a demonization that doesn't need to be there. And while not hold not hurt, not again holding our politicians to fire, putting it on them, something that they've done. So I think that this goes on and on and on with all the different tactics we choose for all the different demonstrations and this and that. And there's lots of rooms to disagree on all these things. There's no magic formula to how social change comes about, and people react to things differently, and on and on and on. But I think that to me, bringing a Russian flag to a Palestinian demonstration, I don't see where the argument would be. If you brought a Russian flag to counter NATO, at least there you can have some argument. I wouldn't do that, but at least there you can have some sort of like, okay, there's a connection here. Russia's not even particularly pro-Palestinian. So, but yeah, go ahead, Lynn.
Um, our local politician here won't do a resolution, okay? So someone brought up Hannah Arendt and he went ballistic. Um, and this is just so ironic because Hannah Arendt was all about one person versus, a crowd mentality. And this this is a debate between 8 city councilors and one, the only one that's pro-Palestine. And it was just so unconscionable that like Eichmann, the whole principle of Eichmann is that and the correlation was made that this city council just does groupthink. They aren't independent thinkers. They don't have a debate. They don't have a discussion. There is no discussion about Palestine, right? You know, East. There's no discussion. And so the polarization goes on, and it's just anti-Semitic, and there's no substantive discussion. And you know what? In the end, it doesn't matter who's right or who's wrong. We're all going to be gone in a mushroom cloud, right? So I'm just trying to survive and have a little bit of discussion here in the meantime.
Yeah,
It's,
well, I don't know the background to the city council debate and stuff like that,
but Eichmann,
yeah, yeah, but I think that unfortunately
they're,
that's
it's like
common in
the
most.
council are little Eichmanns, and they are. They
Yeah,
just all agree with everybody. Everybody agree. They're so civilized.
but and this is where it becomes just a question of building political power, and that we've seen this very clearly here over the past 13 months. How many of the institutions of Canadian political life are right and wrong doesn't really like they just it's just a question of sort of power and a question of following the dominant ethos and there's really sort of no threshold to how many Palestinians can be killed and that will necessarily change unless we can shift it. And we have shifted it in some areas, and there's been some successes here and there, and there's been some advances and this and that. But it's pretty naked kind of display of it's just a rapport de force. So the question is, how do we build that rapport de force to change things?
It
Go
was
ahead.
so ironic because this one councilman said blood on our hands, and this other councilman said she can't, like, I don't want to be political, but that's not okay about blood on our hands. It's not. And she had actually said afterwards, she said it was blood on my hands, but she was wrong. She said blood on our hands. And that's the irony of the whole thing. Is it our or my? When it comes to Eichmann, was it our or my? No, he was just doing his job, right? He was just a guy doing his job.
Yeah.
So yeah, the blood's on everybody's hands.
Go ahead, John, quickly, because I have to run because I have some parental stuff.
Well, sure. Just very quickly. I mean, the saying, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend," is dead wrong, right? That gets us into all kinds of issues. I think instead we should say, "My friends are the friends of the working class," and that's certainly not Russia, and it's not nor China. Maybe Brazil occasionally. Um, what I wanted to ask, and now I've lost the I've lost the thread. Is maybe if you're going to hang a flag, I was going to ask you to comment on the Republic of Ireland, this little colonial settler state that also happens to be European, and the way that they're sounding out on Palestine and other issues. If you're going to fly a flag, that's probably the one you want to go with.
Yeah, maybe I would say there were South Africa flags that appeared at some of the Palestine demonstrations after the ICJ case. I I didn't see any problem with that. I think I didn't have one myself, but I wouldn't have been if someone had asked me to hold the flag for a few minutes. I would have been okay with that. But yeah, so but I'll leave it
Happy
there.
childcare duties.
Yes, thanks everyone. Take care.